If you still want me, come get me. I whispered to myself, fingers trembling as I held my phone against the damp leather seat, rain tapping a frantic rhythm on the windshield like it was echoing my heartbeat. The streets of Manhattan shimmered under the glow of the streetlights, puddles reflecting neon signs and fractured shards, and every honk or splash of passing tires made me flinch. I glanced down at my dress, black silk clinging to me from the sudden storm, shoes pressed against the pedals of my rental car, and thought about the last 24 hours, the perfect, orchestrated chaos of wedding plans, floral arrangements, and vows that suddenly felt suffocating. I had spent weeks rehearsing smiles and polite words, pretending to be thrilled, but inside, a storm raged louder than the one outside. My thumb hovered over the send button, heart hammering, knowing that once I did this, there was no turning back. Alexander Romano's name flashed across my mind, the man who haunted my thoughts more than any reality could justify, whose presence could silence a room without a word, whose aura of power and control had followed me across every mundane street and social gathering. I pressed send. The message shot into the ether, tiny letters carrying the weight of every doubt, every fleeting heartbeat I had tried to ignore. Seconds stretched into minutes. The wipers scraped unevenly across the windshield, and I imagined him reading the words, imagining the calculated calm behind those storm-colored eyes, the perfect composure that made every man around him seem ordinary. I drove, careful yet reckless, the city feeling both enormous and claustrophobic at once, and each turn brought a surge of adrenaline that tangled with fear and anticipation. The hotel ahead loomed like a fortress, glass and steel reflecting every neon pulse, and I could see the faint outline of figures moving in the lobby. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, a tremor running through my arms. I was aware of every small detail, the smell of wet asphalt mixing with coffee from a corner cafe, the distant hum of a delivery truck, the way my heels clicked faintly against the pedals. Then, without warning, the familiar hum of a black sedan came from the side street, sliding into the lane behind me. My stomach tightened, a mix of recognition and dread. He was here. Alexander Romano, in his tailored suit that seemed to absorb the dim light rather than reflect it, stepped out as though he had always been part of this rainy tableau, movement deliberate and measured, eyes scanning the street with an intensity that made my breath catch. I didn't move, didn't dare. The rain dripped from the brim of his coat, wet strands of black hair clinging to his temple, yet every gesture was precise, controlled, a quiet declaration of ownership. He approached, shoes silent on wet pavement, and the world seemed to contract, leaving only the rain, the city lights, and the two of us suspended in an unspoken confrontation. "You came," I said, voice barely audible, and he tilted his head, a half-smile that didn't touch those storm-blue eyes, a promise of authority without a single word. "I always come," he said, voice low, resonant, carrying the kind of certainty that made me shiver and want to fight simultaneously. I exhaled shakily, the words I had rehearsed for hours evaporating, replaced by a pulse of heat and tension I could not name. Around us, the city continued, oblivious, yet the space between us felt like its own universe, a battle of wills and hearts intertwined. The air smelled of wet stone and expensive cologne, each breath sharp and precise. "You don't understand," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. He raised a single brow, silence thick and commanding, waiting for my next move. The storm around us mirrored the one inside me, and I realized that tonight, everything changed. The wedding, the promises, the careful life I had built. None of it mattered against the force of him standing there, quiet, inexorable, claiming more than just space. "Then let's see if you really want me," I said, a mixture of defiance and surrender, and he stepped closer, the world narrowing to the click of his heels, the rhythm of rain, and the undeniable pulse of inevitability that tethered us together, a silent challenge echoing louder than any vows I had almost made. The worst decisions in life rarely feel wrong when you make them. They feel necessary. The rain hammered against the windshield so hard it blurred the Manhattan skyline into a watercolor of white lights and shadows. I sat alone in my rental car with my wedding dress hanging in a garment bag behind me and a diamond engagement ring resting heavily on my left hand. In exactly 2 hours, I was supposed to walk down an aisle, smile for photographs, and promise forever to a man everyone said was perfect for me. A successful attorney, a respected family, a future that looked flawless from the outside. So why did it feel like I was slowly suffocating? I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and stared at the glowing screen of my phone. One name sat at the top of my messages. Alexander Romano. The one person I should never have been thinking about tonight. The one person I had spent the last 8 months trying desperately to forget. Outside, yellow taxi lights streaked across rain-soaked pavement. A delivery truck rumbled through an intersection half a block away. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed through the city. Life continued as normal. But inside that car, my entire world stood on the edge of collapse. I remembered the first time I met Alexander. The confidence, the calm, the way he could walk into a room filled with powerful people and somehow become the center of gravity without asking for attention. He never raised his voice, never needed to. Everyone noticed him anyway, including me, especially me. I had spent months convincing myself that walking away had been the right decision, that choosing a predictable future was smarter than chasing feelings I couldn't explain. Yet every morning, I still found myself thinking about him. Every night, I compared every conversation to the ones we'd shared. Every milestone felt strangely incomplete. My phone felt heavier with every passing second. I unlocked it, opened our old message thread, scrolled through months of silence. Then I typed 4 words. If you still want me. I stopped. My pulse pounded in my ears. The rain seemed louder now. The city brighter. My breathing shallower. I added 3 more words. Come get me. For a moment, I just stared at the message. 7 words. 7 dangerous words capable of changing everything. My thumb hovered above the screen. Then I pressed send. The message disappeared. Delivered. My stomach dropped instantly. There was no taking it back now. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and laughed nervously at myself. What had I done? Maybe he wouldn't answer. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe he would see the message and ignore it. Honestly, he should ignore it. I had given him every reason to. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, telling myself I needed to focus on the wedding, on reality, on the life waiting for me. Yet my eyes kept drifting toward the phone. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Nothing. By the time I reached the hotel where guests were already gathering, disappointment settled quietly into my chest. Of course. Why would he come? Why would he still care? I parked beneath the covered entrance and sat there listening to the ticking of the cooling engine. The massive hotel glowed with warm golden light. Through the glass doors, I could see elegantly dressed guests arriving with umbrellas and smiles. Everything was ready. Everything except me. My phone suddenly lit up. My breath caught. One new message. Alexander Romano. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The reply contained only 4 words. Look out your window. My heart stopped. Slowly, I turned toward the rain-covered glass. Across the street, beneath the glow of a street lamp, stood a black sedan I recognized instantly. The driver's door opened. A tall figure stepped out. Dark coat, calm posture, unmistakable presence. Even from a distance of nearly 50 yards, I knew it was him. Alexander Romano had come, and judging by the way he stood there in the rain, looking directly at me as if he'd known exactly where to find me, something told me he hadn't come merely to talk. The black sedan glistened under the lamplight, raindrops sliding down its hood like liquid silver. I held my breath, trying not to appear frantic, though my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Alexander Romano stood there, shoulders squared, coat collar raised against the drizzle, exuding the kind of quiet authority that could make an entire room fall silent without a single word. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt, to retreat to the safety of the hotel lobby where everything felt organized, predictable, and acceptable. Yet I remained frozen, caught in a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a thrill I could not name. Slowly, deliberately, he began to cross the wet pavement, each step precise, measured, and yet somehow unstoppable. My pulse raced with every footfall that brought him closer. I could see the way his eyes scanned the environment, aware of every passerby, every moving shadow, every flicker of light, as though the city itself had become an extension of him. The rain beat against the windshield and roof, a steady percussion that matched the rhythm of my heart. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move, unlocking the car door, letting it swing open with a metallic click that echoed louder than it should have. The cold air hit my face, and I shivered, not entirely from the temperature. Alexander stopped a few feet away, the puddles reflecting the street lamp above in fragmented patterns that danced across the tailored lines of his coat. I stepped out, feeling the wet fabric of my dress cling to me, heels clicking faintly against the asphalt, the sound swallowed by the steady downpour. He did not move toward me immediately. Instead, he regarded me with an intensity that made every thought in my mind scatter like leaves in a storm. "Isabella," he said, voice calm yet commanding, carrying an undertone that made it clear he expected my full attention. "Alexander," I whispered, though the sound felt foreign, almost surreal in the quiet intensity of the street. He tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable, and I felt the weight of his presence pressing against the air between us. "You are here," he said simply, and it was not a question. My heart thumped audibly, and I realized I had no choice but to step closer, drawn forward by an unseen force, by the magnetic certainty of him being exactly where he should be. The rain ran down the sides of my face, mixing with the rapid flush of heat that crept up my neck and across my cheeks. I wanted to retreat, yet every fiber of my being held me rooted to the spot. Alexander's gaze held mine unwaveringly, a silent assessment, as if measuring not just my physical presence, but my very thoughts. "Why did you send the message?" he asked, voice soft yet undeniably powerful, each word deliberate. I exhaled shakily. "Because I had to know, if you still care." The words trembled out, an admission of vulnerability I had not intended to show. He did not answer immediately, simply studying me, rain falling over us like a private curtain, the world outside muted, distant, irrelevant. Then, with a movement almost imperceptible, he took a step closer, the distance between us collapsing. The space felt charged, alive, each second stretching, bending, weighted with unspoken meaning. I felt a shiver run down my spine as he spoke again, this time softer, closer. "I have always cared, Isabella. More than you realize." I nodded, unable to form words. The heaviness of his presence, the clarity of his intent, and the storm around us pressing together into a single, overwhelming sensation. My thoughts raced, images of the wedding, the hotel, the guests, all fading, replaced by the immediacy of him, the undeniable force of choice that this moment demanded. Alexander extended a hand, not demanding, not forcing, but offering, a tether to the certainty I had been craving and denying in equal measure. My fingers hovered over his, then I let them brush together, and the connection sent a shock through me, grounding me while simultaneously making my pulse soar. Around us, the city continued to move, unaware of the small universe suspended in rain and anticipation. The sedan waited silently behind him, a shadowed sentinel, and for a moment, the world was reduced to the cold, precise rhythm of raindrops, the warmth of our proximity, and the inexorable pull of what neither of us could deny. My breath caught in my throat, anticipation and relief coiling together as he finally spoke, the words carrying both promise and command. "Then come with me. There is nowhere else you should be tonight." And I stepped forward, leaving the safety of familiarity behind, moving toward the certainty, the storm, and the man who had always held the kind of power that made all choices clear and all consequences immediate. For a second, I could not move. The rain continued to fall between us, soft and steady, turning the city into a blur of silver reflections and distant headlights. Alexander's hand remained extended, patient and certain, as though he already knew what choice I would make. My heart pounded so hard it almost drowned out the noise of the traffic behind me. 2 hours. That was all that remained before a ceremony everyone expected me to attend. 2 hours before I was supposed to smile beside a man who had never once made my pulse race the way it did now. I looked past Alexander toward the hotel entrance. Guests were arriving under umbrellas. Valets hurried back and forth. Through the glass walls, I could see golden chandeliers glowing above polished marble floors. It looked beautiful, perfect, safe, yet somehow it felt like a life that belonged to someone else. "You should not have come," I whispered. The corner of Alexander's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Not quite amusement. You asked me to. His voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it. Something steady and unwavering. The kind of confidence that could not be shaken by storms or circumstances. I lowered my eyes for a moment. I almost deleted the message. But you did not. I laughed softly despite myself. No, I did not. The silence that followed felt strangely comfortable. Rain tapped against nearby vehicles. A taxi rolled through the intersection. Somewhere above us, thunder murmured across the clouds. Alexander slipped one hand into his coat pocket and studied me carefully. Not my dress. Not my appearance. Me. The real me. The version I spent most of my life hiding behind polite smiles and careful decisions. Tell me something honestly, Isabella, he said. If I had not come tonight, would you still have gone inside? The question hit harder than I expected. I opened my mouth, closed it again, because I did not know. That was the terrifying truth. For months I had convinced myself that certainty existed, that life could be planned, controlled, organized into neat little boxes. But standing there now, I realized uncertainty had followed me for a very long time. I had simply ignored it. I do not know, I admitted quietly. Alexander nodded once, as though that answer told him everything he needed to know. A black umbrella suddenly appeared beside us. One of his drivers stood several feet away, holding it respectfully. Alexander barely glanced toward him before taking the umbrella and opening it above my head. The gesture was simple, small, yet it affected me more than grand speeches ever could. He noticed the details. Always had. While everyone else saw the polished version of my life, Alexander somehow saw the cracks underneath. You are cold, he said. I am nervous. That too. Another reluctant smile escaped me. It disappeared quickly when my phone began vibrating inside my purse. The sound felt unnaturally loud. I already knew who it was before looking. Nathan. My fiancé. My stomach tightened. The screen illuminated his name across the display. Alexander's eyes dropped briefly to the phone before returning to me. He said nothing. He did not need to. The choice belonged to me. My finger hovered over the answer button. Then over decline. The vibration stopped. Seconds later it started again. Then again. The rain continued falling around us. Alexander remained silent. Patient. Watching. Waiting. Finally, I pressed the side button and silenced the phone completely. The screen went dark. For the first time all evening, the knot inside my chest loosened slightly. Alexander exhaled slowly. There she is. I frowned. Who? The woman who stops making decisions for everyone else and starts making them for herself. His words settled somewhere deep inside me. Because the frightening part was that he might be right. I had spent years trying to be the daughter everyone admired, the employee everyone trusted, the fiancé everyone approved of. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten to ask what I wanted. Another flash of lightning illuminated the skyline behind him. For a brief second, the city looked frozen in white light. Alexander stepped closer, his voice lowering. Come with me. My breath caught. Where? Away from here. His gaze never left mine. No expectations. No pressure. No audience. The hotel lights glowed behind me. The city stretched endlessly around us. And for the first time in months, I felt the terrifying possibility of freedom. Then my phone lit up one final time. A text message. Not from Nathan. From my mother. 3 simple words appeared on the screen. Where are you? The car ride was silent at first, the wipers cutting through the persistent rain while the city blurred past in streaks of gold and white. Alexander drove with a calm precision that I could not quite comprehend, hands steady on the wheel, eyes focused yet always aware of the surrounding traffic and pedestrians. The streets were slick, reflecting neon signs and the occasional headlights of taxis and delivery trucks, each puddle a mirror to the chaos and movement of the city. I kept my hands folded in my lap, staring out the window, letting the rhythm of the rain soothe some of the tension coiling in my chest. My mind raced with the decision I had made, the one that had taken me away from the safety of expectation into this uncertain moment. Every corner we turned seemed to pull me further away from everything I thought was certain. Yet every mile also carried an unspoken reassurance that this was where I needed to be. Alexander glanced at me from the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable yet somehow comforting. You are quiet, he said, voice soft but carrying weight, not demanding an answer. only acknowledging the presence of my thoughts. I swallowed, lips dry. "I am thinking," I replied, barely above a whisper. He nodded once, returning his attention to the road ahead. The city passed by in a muted blur, the lights smearing into long lines in the rain-soaked night. Occasionally, a street lamp would illuminate the interior of the car, casting long shadows across Alexander's face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw and the intensity of his eyes. I felt simultaneously safe and aware of the power in the space beside me, a presence both calm and commanding. After several blocks, he finally spoke again. "You made a choice tonight. You left the certainty behind. That takes courage." I exhaled, letting a small laugh escape despite the tightness in my chest. "Or foolishness," I said, watching the reflection of passing streetlights ripple across my hands. "Perhaps both," he admitted, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing at the edge of his mouth. The sound of rain against the roof and windshield filled the silence between our words, punctuated by the soft hum of the engine and occasional tires splashing through puddles. I felt the tension inside me slowly loosen, replaced by a strange sense of alignment, as though moving in sync with the car and the man driving it was a small act of liberation. "Where are we going?" I asked, voice tentative, though I already knew it was a question without a simple answer. Alexander glanced at me briefly, his gaze piercing yet gentle. "Somewhere away from all expectations," he said. "Somewhere we can decide what matters without everyone else telling us." The city seemed to fade behind us, the familiar skyline replaced by roads I did not recognize and buildings I had never noticed before. Yet, in that unfamiliarity, there was freedom, a blank slate stretched out before me, and I realized that the weight of the evening, of obligations and eyes watching, had begun to lift. My fingers traced the edge of the dress in my lap, wet from the rain outside, and I realized that each raindrop sliding down the glass mirrored the feeling of shedding the previous constraints, each one washing away a layer of expectation. Alexander's presence beside me was steady, unwavering, a silent promise of reliability amid the uncertainty. "You will not be alone in this," he said, voice low, resonant, and certain. I nodded, unable to find words that could encompass the mix of relief, anticipation, and apprehension churning inside me. The car took a sharp turn, lights from a nearby diner reflecting off wet asphalt, and for a fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of him watching me as if he could read every emotion flickering across my face. That glance, silent and powerful, grounded me, reminding me that the choice I had made was my own and that support, strength, and understanding were not as elusive as I had feared. Outside, the rain continued unabated, the world around us moving at its own chaotic pace. Yet inside that vehicle, there was clarity, connection, and the beginning of a path that felt entirely, irrevocably mine to follow. The car continued down the rain-slick streets, headlights reflecting off puddles and turning the asphalt into a river of molten light. I kept my eyes on the blurred scenery, yet I could not stop glancing at Alexander, who drove with an effortless control that seemed to command not only the vehicle, but the very air around him. The soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic tap of the wipers created a cadence that calmed some of the storm inside me, though the tension in my chest remained, a persistent reminder of the choice I had made. Outside, the city moved as usual, taxis weaving past, people hurrying under umbrellas, neon signs flickering with advertisements that seemed inconsequential against the intensity of the moment in the car. I could feel Alexander's presence beside me, quiet but palpable, like a weight I could rely on, steady and unyielding. "Where are we going?" I finally asked, voice low, cautious, testing boundaries that felt both safe and unknown. He did not glance at me immediately, his eyes focused on the road, but there was a soft tightening at his jaw, a subtle acknowledgement that he had heard me. "Somewhere we can think," he said, voice calm yet firm, carrying a certainty that made hesitation feel almost absurd. I drew in a breath, letting the damp air fill my lungs, and exhaled slowly, trying to process the unfamiliar sensation of following someone purely because I wanted to, without obligation or expectation. The rain fell harder, drumming a steady rhythm against the roof of the car and the glass, and for the first time that evening, I felt like the outside world, the hotel, the waiting guests, the life I had left behind, was nothing more than a distant memory. Alexander shifted slightly in his seat, eyes flicking to me for the briefest moment. "You are quiet," he observed, a statement that felt more like a note of concern than a question. I nodded, fingers twisting in the folds of my dress. "I am thinking," I admitted, voice small but honest. He did not press, did not comment further, letting the silence stretch in a way that made me aware of every detail. The texture of the leather seats beneath my hands, the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the petrichor seeping in from the open window, the way the streetlights created fleeting shadows across his face. The city passed in a blur of lights and reflections, but inside the car, there was a stillness, a pause in time that allowed thought and emotion to stretch and settle. "This is a moment," he said after several blocks, voice steady. "A moment that requires only honesty." I looked at him then, caught by the intensity of his gaze, the way it held expectation without command. "Honesty," I echoed softly. "Yes," he said. "About everything. About what you want. About what you feel. About what you will allow yourself to take from this night." The words hung between us, heavy but liberating, and I realized that I had spent so long answering to everyone else that I had forgotten how to answer for myself. My hands rested lightly on my lap, breathing slowing as I absorbed the weight of his statement. The car turned onto a quieter street, lights dimming, rain drumming a softer rhythm, and I felt a curious mix of fear and anticipation building in my chest. It was not the kind of fear that forced retreat. It was the kind that sharpened senses, focused attention, and demanded presence. Alexander's hand brushed against mine briefly as he shifted, a small, unassuming gesture that anchored me, reminded me that choice and consequence were intertwined, yet manageable in this shared space. "You do not need to explain anything yet," he said softly, eyes forward, voice low. "Not to anyone, not even to yourself, if you are not ready." I nodded, swallowing hard, aware of the storm outside and the calm inside, and the strange sense of liberation that came from knowing the path forward was uncertain, yet entirely mine to follow. Each mile carried us farther from expectation, from obligation, from the predictable life I had rehearsed for years, and yet I felt more centered than I had in months. The rain lightened, becoming a drizzle, and the city stretched on, reflections shimmering and breaking apart like fragments of old routines dissolving in water. Alexander glanced toward me again, a slight curve at the edge of his mouth, not quite a smile but an acknowledgement, and I realized that the moments ahead were ours to define, each decision a step toward clarity, connection, and a night that belonged entirely to choice and intention, free from the weight of what had been imposed upon me. The road eventually narrowed into a quieter part of the city where the noise of Manhattan faded into a distant hum. Rain still lingered on the pavement, but the storm had softened into a fine mist that drifted beneath the streetlights like silver smoke. Alexander guided the car toward a small waterfront district I had never visited before. The buildings were older here. Brick facades, warm windows, family-owned restaurants tucked between bookstores and coffee shops. The kind of neighborhood people rushed past without noticing. He parked beside the river and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sudden silence felt strange after the steady rhythm of rain and tires. Across the water, the skyline shimmered in the distance, towers glowing against the clouds like another world entirely. I stared through the windshield. "Why here?" I asked quietly. Alexander rested one arm against the steering wheel. "Because nobody is looking for you here." I looked at him. "People are definitely looking for me." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Not here." There was something reassuring about the certainty in his voice. Not controlling, not demanding, just confident, as though he had already calculated every possible outcome and decided none of them would reach me tonight. We stepped out of the car. Cool air wrapped around me instantly. The scent of rainwater and the river mixed with fresh coffee drifting from a nearby cafe that was somehow still open after 10 o'clock. Alexander walked beside me without speaking. For once, the silence felt comfortable. We followed the waterfront path for several minutes. Wooden benches lined the walkway. Small boats rocked gently against their docks. Reflections danced across the dark water whenever a passing ferry moved through the harbor. I wrapped my arms around myself and watched the city lights ripple in the distance. "My mother has probably called 20 times by now," I admitted. Alexander glanced toward me. And your fiancé? The word felt strange now. Distant. Like something belonging to another version of my life. Probably more. Alexander nodded once. Do you want to call them? I stopped walking. The question surprised me. Most people would have told me what to do. What I should say? What decision made the most sense? Alexander simply offered the choice. I considered it honestly. Then I shook my head. Not yet. He accepted the answer immediately. No judgment. No lecture. We continued walking. Somewhere behind us, a bell above a restaurant door chimed as customers entered. Laughter drifted across the street. Life continued normally around us. Yet I felt suspended between two futures. One familiar, one unknown. After a few minutes, we reached the end of the dock where the river stretched open before us. Alexander leaned lightly against the railing. I stood beside him. Wind moved through my hair. The city glowed across the water. Tell me something, he said. His voice was calm. Careful. Why did you say yes to him? The question settled heavily in my chest. I looked down at the water below. For several seconds, I could not answer. Because the truth was complicated. Because he made sense, I finally said. Everyone liked him. My parents approved. My friends approved. He was stable. Reliable. Alexander remained silent. Waiting. I laughed softly, though there was little humor in it. Do you know how ridiculous that sounds? No, he said. It sounds honest. I stared across the river. I kept telling myself feelings were not enough. That eventually excitement fades. That eventually people choose comfort. The wind carried my words away into the darkness. Alexander looked toward the skyline. And now, I swallowed hard. Now I think comfort can become a cage if you stay there long enough. For the first time all evening, Alexander looked genuinely affected by something I said. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just a subtle shift in his expression. A brief softening around his eyes. The kind of reaction someone has when they hear a truth they already understand. Neither of us spoke for several moments. The silence stretched comfortably between us. Then my phone buzzed again. One notification. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. I pulled it from my purse reluctantly. Missed calls. Messages. Voicemails. Dozens of them. My stomach tightened. Alexander watched me carefully. Bad, he asked. I nodded. Then I opened the newest message. It was not from my mother. It was not from Nathan. It was from someone I had not expected. My maid of honor. The text contained only one sentence. Isabella, something happened at the hotel. You need to see this immediately. The alert from my maid of honor made my chest tighten, yet I felt a strange calm beside Alexander, as if his presence absorbed some of my panic. We turned back toward the hotel, the streets reflecting neon and wet asphalt like liquid mirrors, each step measured and deliberate. Alexander held the umbrella above both of us, its shadow falling across our faces, and I noticed how carefully he navigated the sidewalk, avoiding puddles, every motion precise. As we approached the entrance, I could see the front doors opening in hurried motions. Staff members moved quickly, some speaking in hurried whispers, eyes flicking toward the lobby as if trying to anticipate something that had already happened. My pulse quickened. What happened? I asked quietly. Alexander did not answer immediately. He simply scanned the area, taking in the movement, the expressions of the hotel employees, the angle of light reflecting off polished surfaces, as if understanding the situation without words. I followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of a small commotion near the concierge desk, a cluster of faces turned toward someone, expressions a mixture of worry and surprise. We stepped inside, the warmth and light washing over me, a stark contrast to the chill and mist outside. The smell of polished wood, fresh flowers, and mild perfume filled the lobby. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, each step deliberate. Alexander stayed close, his presence steady, a silent reassurance that I was not alone in this. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, subtle but undeniable. Conversations halted mid-sentence, and the staff who were moving quickly now slowed, glancing our way with quiet curiosity. Alexander's dark eyes scanned the room, noting every detail, his expression unreadable but commanding. I caught sight of my maid of honor near the edge of the lobby, her hand gesturing for us to approach, urgency in her movement. Alexander led me forward, subtly adjusting his coat to shield me from unnecessary attention. Stay close, he said softly. I did not need to be told twice. My legs felt heavy, but the determination to see the situation through pushed me forward. As we drew near, my maid of honor turned toward me, a small paper in her hand. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat when she noticed Alexander beside me. He was calm, eyes observing the surroundings, yet his presence carried an unspoken authority that made everyone else defer, even if unconsciously. I took the paper from her hand, reading quickly. A series of errors with the wedding setup, a misplaced guest list, a forgotten detail that could have created embarrassment. Yet the chaos was minor, nothing catastrophic, and my initial fear subsided slightly. Alexander glanced at me, a faint curve at the edge of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but a reassurance. "It seems manageable," he said. I exhaled, relief mixing with residual tension. "Yes, it is," I agreed. We walked together to the main ballroom, lights reflecting off the crystal chandeliers, creating a kaleidoscope of color on the polished floors. Staff were now moving with renewed precision, their earlier panic replaced by focused efficiency. Alexander stayed close, guiding me through the crowd without making a scene, his hand brushing lightly against my back to steer gently through narrow passages. I felt a strange serenity in that proximity, a combination of relief and confidence. The city outside continued its rhythm, oblivious to our moment of subtle chaos inside the hotel. Alexander's presence allowed me to breathe, to recalibrate, and to realize that even when plans went awry, having someone steady beside you made the difference. I walked into the center of the room, staff and minor guests giving us a respectful distance, and Alexander finally spoke, voice low but clear. "Nothing in this world is perfect, Isabella, but you handle it well. Do not let small disruptions control your night." I nodded, absorbing his words, and felt a renewed sense of composure. Tonight was no longer about obligation or expectation. It was about choice, presence, and the clarity that came from understanding who was beside me and what mattered most in this moment. As the piano in the corner began to play softly, I felt a quiet confidence settle over me. And for the first time all evening, I realized that moving forward, whatever challenges awaited, I was no longer alone, and I could face them with deliberate calm, guided by the presence of someone who understood both the chaos of the world and the importance of steady companionship. We moved toward the elevators, the carpet soft beneath our feet, muffling the sound of our steps. The ballroom stretched behind us, chandeliers glittering, but I barely noticed the guests who lingered, the conversations that continued with polite inflection and laughter. Alexander's presence anchored me, a steady weight beside my nervous energy, guiding each movement with subtle precision. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, carrying a warmth that contrasted with the cool drizzle that had clung to my hair earlier. I could feel the tension of the evening fading slightly, replaced by the quiet reassurance of control, of presence, of someone who seemed to understand both the chaos and the calm required to navigate it. As we approached the elevator, Alexander pressed the call button, and the soft ding sounded almost celebratory in the near-empty lobby. I watched the doors slide open smoothly, revealing the interior lit with gentle, warm light. We stepped inside, and Alexander held the door as I moved past, careful to keep my dress from brushing against the polished metal edges. The ride upward was quiet. The hum of the elevator was rhythmic, almost meditative, and I found myself noticing small details, the subtle fragrance of his cologne, the slight tilt of his posture, the way he kept his eyes forward, aware of everything yet not imposing. I could sense the deliberation in each motion, a quiet command of space that made the air around him feel structured and calm. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, voice low, almost as if speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile equilibrium we had created. "I have never been more certain," he replied, eyes still forward, jaw set with quiet determination. I exhaled slowly, letting a fraction of the tension leave my shoulders. The elevator slowed to a gentle stop, doors sliding open to reveal a private lounge space, soft lights spilling across plush chairs, and a small view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows. The rain had stopped entirely, leaving a glistening sheen on the streets below. I stepped forward, Alexander close behind, and felt an odd sense of liberation, the edges of expectation and obligation fading with each measured step. We moved to the window, and I allowed myself to look out over the city, the lights reflecting off wet asphalt, the skyline both familiar and new from this elevated perspective. Alexander stood beside me, shoulders slightly angled toward mine, a subtle offering of presence without confinement, a steady rhythm that allowed me to breathe. "It is beautiful from up here," I said, almost without thinking. He nodded. "It is," he said, "and it is quiet enough for you to think." I considered his words, realizing that the moments leading up to now had been an amalgam of anticipation, fear, and excitement. Here, at last, there was space to choose, to consider without the immediate pressures of expectation. I traced a finger along the glass, watching the reflections ripple in the soft light. Alexander's hand brushed briefly against mine, a touch that was neither commanding nor invasive, but grounding. "You have options," he said, voice calm, resonant. "And it is your choice which one to take." I closed my eyes for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs and the soft glow of the city imprint upon my thoughts. Decisions I had deferred, choices I had avoided, now seemed palpable, immediate, tangible. I opened my eyes and saw Alexander's gaze on me, steady, patient, unwavering. "I do not want to feel trapped by what others expect," I admitted softly. He nodded again, and there was no judgment, only the recognition of honesty, the acknowledgement of agency. "Then you will not," he said. "Not tonight. Not while you are willing to claim it." I allowed myself a small smile, tentative but genuine, and realized that the evening ahead could be defined not by obligation, not by routine, not by the expectations that had so long governed my life, but by deliberate choices, the clarity of presence, and the steady guidance of someone who understood the balance between freedom and support. Outside, the city shimmered, distant sounds of late-night traffic and occasional pedestrian laughter threading through the quiet of our private space, and I felt for the first time in hours that I could breathe fully, think clearly, and move forward with intention, guided by the calm, unspoken assurance that I was not alone and that whatever came next, I had agency, presence, and clarity beside me. My phone remained face down on the small table beside the window, but I could feel its presence like a second heartbeat. Every missed call, every unread message, every expectation waiting on the other side of that screen. Outside, Manhattan glittered beneath the damp night sky, thousands of lights stretching toward the horizon. Inside the private lounge, everything felt strangely still. Alexander stood near the coffee bar, pouring 2 cups without asking whether I wanted one. Somehow he already knew I did. The rich aroma filled the room, warm and comforting against the lingering chill that had settled into my bones. He handed me a cup, and I wrapped both hands around it immediately. The heat seeped into my fingers. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt earned. The kind of silence that exists between 2 people who no longer need to fill every second with words. I took a small sip and stared out at the skyline. "Do you ever regret anything?" I asked quietly. Alexander looked at me over the rim of his cup. "Every intelligent person regrets something." I glanced toward him. That was not an answer. A faint smile touched his face. "Then yes." The honesty surprised me. Most powerful people spent their lives pretending they had never made mistakes. Alexander never seemed interested in pretending. "What do you regret?" I asked. He looked back toward the city. For a moment, I thought he would ignore the question. Then he spoke. "Waiting." His answer was immediate. "Certain." I frowned slightly. "Waiting for what?" His eyes found mine again. "For you." The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer. My pulse quickened despite myself. Alexander set his coffee down and moved closer to the window. Not close enough to overwhelm me, just close enough that I could feel the steady confidence that seemed to surround him. "When you walked away 8 months ago, I told myself I would respect your decision," he said. "You deserve the freedom to choose your own future." I lowered my eyes. Guilt stirred inside me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I know. There was no accusation in his voice. Somehow that made it worse. I spent months convincing myself that stability mattered more than feelings, I admitted. Everyone said it was the smart choice. Alexander folded his arms. And was it? I looked down into my coffee cup. The surface reflected distorted pieces of the city lights behind me. Tiny fragments of gold and white. No. The word came out softer than I intended. But it was true. Painfully true. Alexander nodded once. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Simply acknowledging reality. The honesty between us felt heavier than any argument could have been. My phone buzzed again. Then once more. Neither of us moved. Finally, I reached for it. More messages. More missed calls. More concern. More pressure. But one message stood out among the others. It came from Nathan. I hesitated before opening it. Alexander remained silent. The message was surprisingly short. No anger. No accusations. Just one sentence. If you are not happy, do not do this for my sake. I stared at the words. Read them twice. 3 times. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Because for the first time all evening, someone had given me permission to tell the truth. I sat down slowly. The leather chair creaked softly beneath me. Across the room, Alexander watched without speaking. He seemed to understand that this moment belonged entirely to me. The city lights shimmered through the glass behind him. I think I have spent most of my life becoming the person everyone wanted me to be, I said quietly. Alexander remained still, listening. The good daughter. The dependable friend. The responsible fiancé. My voice cracked slightly. And I do not know who I am when nobody is telling me what they expect. The confession hung in the air between us. Honest. Vulnerable. Real. Alexander walked toward me slowly and crouched beside the chair so that our eyes were level. His voice was calm when he finally spoke. Then tonight is not about choosing between 2 men. I blinked. What? It is about choosing yourself. The words hit harder than anything else he had said all evening. Not because they were dramatic. Because they were true. Outside, a ferry horn echoed across the river. Somewhere below, traffic continued moving through the city. Life went on. Yet inside that room, everything seemed to pause. Alexander held my gaze steadily. And once you know who that person is, he said softly, then you decide who deserves a place beside her. For several seconds, I could not breathe, could not speak, could only stare at him as a realization slowly settled over me. This night had never been about escaping a wedding. It had never been about running away. It had been about finally running toward the truth. The room felt different after that. Not quieter, not calmer, clearer. I sat back in the leather chair and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows while Alexander's words settled somewhere deep inside me. Choose yourself. Such a simple sentence. Yet nobody had ever said it to me before. My entire life had been built around meeting expectations. Good grades. Good career. Good relationship. Good decisions. Everything carefully measured against what would make other people comfortable. Outside, the city sparkled beneath the damp night sky. Thousands of windows glowed across the skyline, each one holding a different story, a different life. For the first time, I wondered what mine would look like if I stopped living it for everyone else. My phone remained silent now. The flood of messages had slowed. The panic waiting on the other side of the screen seemed farther away than before. Alexander moved toward the window and slipped his hands into his pockets. His reflection appeared faintly in the glass beside mine. Strong. Composed. Certain. The complete opposite of how I felt. Yet somehow being near him made uncertainty feel less frightening. What are you thinking? He asked. I smiled faintly. That is a dangerous question. A quiet laugh escaped him. The sound surprised me. Alexander Romano was not a man known for laughter. Try me. I looked back toward the city. I think I am realizing how much of my life happened because I was afraid of disappointing people. The honesty of the admission made my chest tighten. Alexander nodded slowly. Fear is persuasive. It is exhausting. That too. I rested my elbows on my knees and stared down at my hands. The engagement ring still sat on my finger. A symbol of promises I had not been honest enough to question until now. The diamond caught the light every time I moved. Beautiful. Expensive. Meaningless. Not because Nathan was a bad man. He was not. That realization hurt more than if he had been. He was kind. Reliable. Respectful. He simply was not the person who made me feel alive. Alexander glanced down at my hand. His expression did not change. Do you love him? The question landed softly. No pressure. No manipulation. Just truth. I closed my eyes. Thought carefully. Remembered dinners. Vacations. Conversations. Plans. Every memory felt pleasant. Comfortable. Safe. Yet none of them carried the feeling currently sitting in my chest. The feeling that appeared every time Alexander looked at me like he could see straight through every wall I had ever built. I care about him, I said quietly. But that is not the same thing. Alexander remained silent. The answer spoke for itself. Somewhere below us, a ferry horn echoed across the river. The sound rolled through the night, like a reminder that time continued moving forward whether we were ready or not. I stood and walked closer to the window. The city lights reflected against the glass, creating the illusion that I was standing among the stars. "What happens now?" I asked. Alexander joined me. Not too close. Never forcing. Always allowing me space to choose. "Now." His voice was calm. "Now you stop running from the truth." I swallowed. And if the truth changes everything, then everything needed to change. The certainty in his response stole my breath. Because part of me already knew he was right. The version of my life I had been preparing for no longer fit. Like a dress tailored for someone else. Beautiful on the outside. Wrong underneath. My phone suddenly vibrated again. This time only once. A new message appeared across the screen. From my mother. I opened it slowly. There was no anger. No guilt. No pressure. Just a single sentence. "Sweetheart, whatever decision you make tonight, make sure it belongs to you." I stared at the words until they blurred. Emotion tightened my throat unexpectedly. Alexander noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. I handed him the phone. He read the message, then looked at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the clouds finally began to break apart. A sliver of moonlight emerged above the skyline, silver and bright against the darkness. Alexander handed the phone back. His eyes held mine steadily. "It sounds like your mother already knows something important." I blinked. "What?" The faintest smile touched his face. "The same thing I do." My pulse quickened. "And what is that?" His gaze never wavered. "You already made your decision the moment you sent that message." We stepped out of the lounge and into the cool night air. The city was quiet, the streets glistening with leftover rain, reflecting the lights of nearby buildings like liquid mirrors. Alexander led the way, walking with deliberate steps that made the world around us feel organized despite the subtle chaos of the city. I followed closely, feeling the weight of each decision I had made pressing gently against my chest, but it was no longer a burden. It was clarity. The taxis and occasional pedestrians seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as if the entire city had paused for this moment. Alexander guided me toward a small park tucked between buildings, the trees glistening with moisture and the benches damp but inviting. We sat on one, the wood cold beneath our hands, and I realized that I had not felt this level of quiet in months. The hum of the city faded into a soft background, and for the first time, I could focus purely on the sensation of being present, of making a decision for myself. Alexander leaned against the bench beside me, shoulders relaxed but posture still commanding, a balance of calm authority that I found both reassuring and grounding. "It is strange," I said softly, my voice carried just enough for him to hear. "How quiet it feels when you are not doing what everyone expects of you." He looked at me, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "The right decisions often feel like that," he said. I steady. I nodded, wrapping my hands around my knees, breathing in the scent of wet leaves and asphalt mixed with the faint aroma of his cologne. "I always thought I needed approval to feel safe," I continued, "from my parents, from friends, from Nathan. And yet right now, I feel safe simply because I chose." Alexander glanced at me, expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "That is the first step," he said, "to recognizing the power in choosing yourself rather than the comfort others dictate." The city around us continued its rhythm, faint honks, distant footsteps, occasional laughter. But it felt like a soundtrack to our own bubble of time, a pause where nothing outside could influence the clarity we had found. I looked across the park at the subtle reflections in puddles and the soft illumination of the street lamps, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine what freedom truly felt like. Alexander tilted his head slightly, as if noticing my thoughts. "Freedom does not come from avoiding choices," he said. "It comes from embracing them, knowing they shape you rather than confine you." I considered that, letting the words sink in, the weight of years of obedience and fear lifting incrementally. "Then I suppose tonight is about embracing," I whispered, "about stepping into the unknown intentionally." He nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that he understood more than the words could convey. We stayed there for several minutes, letting the cool night air wrap around us, the city a blur of light and sound that somehow enhanced the stillness rather than disturbing it. I realized then that the decision I had been avoiding, choosing the life and the presence that resonated with who I truly was no longer intimidating. It was empowering. Alexander shifted slightly, turning toward me fully, and the intensity of his gaze held a mixture of expectation and patience that made every breath I took seem deliberate. "Whatever you decide," he said finally, voice soft yet firm, "you are not alone in making it. And that will make all the difference." I exhaled, a slow, steady release of tension, letting the clarity of that moment settle into me. The city lights danced on the wet pavement, the distant hum of traffic a gentle accompaniment, and I understood that every step forward would now be guided by choice, presence, and the quiet certainty that I was no longer defined by the expectations of others, but by the deliberate actions of my own heart. We left the small park behind and walked toward a quieter street, the night cool and damp around us, the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. Alexander kept a steady pace beside me, and somehow, his presence made every decision I had faced that evening feel less intimidating. Each step I took away from the hotel felt like shedding years of expectation, each breath a reclamation of autonomy. The city continued in its quiet rhythm. Occasional cars passed by, distant voices of pedestrians drifting through alleyways, but inside our bubble, the world felt smaller, more intimate. "I never imagined it would feel like this," I admitted, voice low, almost lost in the sounds of the city. Alexander glanced at me, expression neutral but attentive. "Like what?" he asked. I hesitated. "Like choosing myself could be easier than I imagined." He tilted his head slightly. "Because you are finally aware that your choices matter." We walked on in silence. For a few moments, my heels clicking softly against the pavement, the sound muted by puddles and the damp night. The buildings around us were mostly closed now, storefronts dark, neon signs flickering faintly, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced along the sidewalk. I breathed deeply, letting the air fill my lungs, grounding myself in the sensation of being fully present, fully in charge of the decisions that had been deferred for far too long. Alexander stopped near a small cafe, long closed for the night, its windows fogged from warmth inside earlier in the evening. He looked down at me, eyes steady, almost challenging, yet patient. "Do you know what you want?" he asked. I paused, considering the question carefully. Not what others wanted. Not what seemed convenient or safe. Not what was expected of me. Truly, honestly, what I wanted. I opened my mouth, then closed it, searching for the courage to articulate a truth I had kept buried. "I want clarity," I finally said. "I want to feel certain about my decisions." He nodded, a faint approving gesture. "Then you have it. Right now? Not tomorrow, not next week. Here." I allowed a small smile, tentative but genuine, to form. The weight of unspoken obligations and fear of judgment lifted slightly, replaced by a quiet power that came from owning my path. He gestured toward the street, then back at the skyline beyond the river, which shimmered faintly in the distance. "Everything you have considered leaving behind," he said, "you will see is only meaningful if you understand your own heart first." The city lights reflected in the river below, fractured into patterns that seemed to echo my scattered thoughts. I felt the energy of the moment, the gravity of choice, the liberation and clarity. Alexander took a step closer, close enough that I felt the subtle warmth of his presence without feeling confined. "You have walked away from expectations tonight," he said softly, voice calm but resonant. "And that step alone defines the person you are willing to be." I exhaled, letting the words sink in. The tension that had been coiled in my chest all evening began to unwind, replaced by a sense of agency I had not realized I craved so deeply. The faint rustle of leaves in the nearby trees, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional flicker of neon light from a corner store, all faded into a quiet background as I focused on the certainty growing within me. Alexander's eyes met mine again, steady, unwavering, patient. "And now?" I asked, almost breathless. "Now," he said, voice low, deliberate. "You step forward knowing that every decision you make belongs to you, and the rest will follow accordingly." I nodded slowly, absorbing the gravity of the moment, feeling the night wrap around us like a gentle affirmation of possibility, and for the first time all evening, I understood that moving forward was not about escape or defiance, but about choosing myself, fully, deliberately, and without regret. The streets had grown quieter now, the city's pulse softening to a distant murmur as we continued walking beneath the dim glow of streetlights reflecting off slick pavement. Alexander's presence beside me remained constant, a silent anchor in the shifting rhythm of the night, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease incrementally. The distant hum of traffic mixed with the occasional splash from a passing car, creating a gentle percussion that accompanied our steps. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling both the chill and the quiet reassurance of someone who seemed to understand the weight of the decisions I had been carrying all evening. "It feels strange," I said softly, voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "How calm it feels when the choices are finally mine." Alexander glanced at me briefly, the faintest curve of a smile at the edge of his mouth. "Calm can be deceiving," he said, tone measured. "But it is also honest." I nodded slowly, absorbing his words while letting my gaze drift over the reflections of the skyline across the river. The lights shimmered like scattered fragments, broken but beautiful, and I realized that, much like the city, I could find clarity in imperfection. "I keep thinking about all the expectations," I admitted, "all the plans, all the people who think they know what is best for me." Alexander's eyes found mine again, unwavering, patient, commanding in their quiet assurance. "Expectations are easily placed," he said, "but they do not define the path you are willing to walk." I exhaled, the weight of that truth settling into me, a sensation I had been avoiding for too long. "And yet," I continued, "making a decision for myself feels heavier than I imagined." He stepped closer, not pressing, not demanding, merely present, a subtle gravity that made hesitation feel unnecessary. "That weight," he said softly, "is the gravity of owning your truth. It is natural. It is necessary." I took a breath, letting the words anchor me as we walked toward a small park bench overlooking the river. The water shimmered under the fragmented city lights, a quiet expanse reflecting a sky that had begun to clear after the rain. I lowered myself onto the bench, feeling the cold wood through the fabric of my dress, and Alexander settled beside me with a measured ease that allowed me space while offering reassurance. "You have spent so long deferring to others," he said, voice low, calm, resonant, "that your own desires felt secondary. Now, they are primary." I stared across the water, letting the reflections dance with my racing thoughts. "It is frightening," I admitted, "to realize I have to decide entirely on my own." "Then it is good that you are not alone," he said. "You have me beside you, observing, supporting, without judgment." I allowed a small, tentative smile, the first unguarded one of the evening, to form. For the first time, the weight of decision felt balanced by the presence of someone steady, someone capable of making the unknown feel navigable. "Do you think I am doing the right thing?" I asked quietly, not expecting a definitive answer, but needing to voice the question. Alexander's gaze held mine, steady, unwavering. "You are doing what is true," he said simply. "Truth is not always simple, nor comfortable, nor predictable, but it is always right." The city breathed around us, neon lights glimmering, distant car horns a reminder that life continued. But in this small moment, the world had narrowed to clarity, choice, and shared understanding. I took another breath, letting the night settle into me, letting the calm certainty of Alexander's presence guide the steps that were mine alone to take, understanding finally that each decision from here forward would be deliberate, conscious, and entirely my own. The river shimmered beneath the moonlight as if the city itself had finally exhaled. I sat beside Alexander and watched the reflections stretch across the dark water, breaking apart whenever a passing boat disturbed the surface. The air felt different now, lighter, cleaner. For the first time all evening, I was not thinking about expectations or consequences. I was thinking about truth, real truth, the kind that remains after every excuse has been stripped away. Alexander rested his arms on the back of the bench and looked out across the skyline. Neither of us rushed to fill the silence. It had become something valuable between us, a place where honesty could exist without pressure. My phone remained in my hand, dark and quiet. The constant stream of messages had finally stopped. It felt symbolic somehow, as though the world had run out of instructions to give me. "You know what I keep realizing?" I asked softly. Alexander turned toward me. "What?" I smiled faintly. I spent months convincing myself I was choosing stability, but I was really choosing predictability. He considered that for a moment. There is a difference. A big one. I looked down at the engagement ring still resting on my finger. Under the moonlight, the diamonds sparkled beautifully. Anyone looking at it would see certainty, commitment, a future already decided. Yet all I could see was a version of myself that no longer existed. Alexander followed my gaze, but said nothing. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply allowed me room to arrive at my own conclusions. I slowly slipped the ring from my finger. The movement felt strangely emotional. Not dramatic, not painful, just honest. Like finally admitting something I had known for a very long time. I held it in my palm and stared at it. I thought this represented my future. I whispered. Alexander's voice remained calm. And now? I closed my fingers around it. Now I think it represented the future everyone else wanted for me. The words settled between us. True, unavoidable, liberating. A cool breeze moved across the water, lifting strands of my hair. Somewhere behind us, a couple laughed as they walked along the path. A ferry crossed the river in the distance, its lights glowing softly against the dark horizon. Life continued, ordinary and beautiful. Alexander leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "What are you afraid of now?" he asked. I expected the question. Maybe I had been expecting it all night. I thought carefully before answering. Not failure. He nodded. Waiting. Not judgment. Another nod. I smiled slightly. I think I am afraid of being happy and then losing it. For the first time, Alexander looked away. Toward the skyline. Toward the city. Toward something only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet sincerity I had rarely heard before. Nothing worth having comes with guarantees. I looked at him. The moonlight caught the sharp line of his profile. The calm confidence. The steady certainty. Yet beneath all of that, I suddenly saw something else. Vulnerability. Not weakness. Humanity. "Does that scare you?" I asked. He laughed softly. "Every day." That answer surprised me more than anything else. Alexander Romano was supposed to be fearless, unshakable, untouchable. Yet the man sitting beside me was simply honest enough to admit that uncertainty existed for everyone, including him. The realization made him feel closer somehow. More real. We sat there quietly for several minutes, watching the city, listening to the water, letting the night unfold around us. Then Alexander stood and extended his hand toward me, the same way he had earlier. Patient, certain, offering a choice instead of demanding one. I looked at his hand, then at him, then at the city stretching endlessly before us. The life I had planned was behind me now. The future was unwritten, uncertain, entirely mine. Slowly, I placed my hand in his. Alexander helped me to my feet. His grip was warm, steady, reassuring. We stood side by side facing the skyline. No promises, no pressure, no expectations, just possibility. Then my phone lit up one final time. A new message appeared on the screen. It was from Nathan. My breath caught as I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. "I hope you find the life you could never find with me." The message remained on the screen long after I finished reading it. The words were simple, generous, unexpected. I stared at them while the city lights shimmered across the river, and a strange ache settled in my chest. Not because I wanted to go back, not because I doubted my decision, but because kindness has a way of making endings feel heavier. Nathan had every reason to be angry, every reason to blame me. Instead, he gave me grace. I lowered the phone slowly and slipped it into my purse. For several seconds I said nothing. Alexander did not rush to fill the silence. He simply stood beside me, hands in his coat pockets, looking out across the water as though he understood exactly what was happening inside my head. "He is a good man," I finally said. My voice sounded distant, thoughtful. Alexander nodded once. "I know." The answer surprised me. I turned toward him. "You know?" A faint smile touched his face. "I never thought he was a bad man, Isabella." The honesty of the statement caught me off guard. For months I had imagined these two men as opposites. One represented safety. The other represented uncertainty. One represented predictability. The other represented possibility. Yet standing here now, I realized life was more complicated than that. "Then why did you come tonight?" I asked quietly. Alexander's eyes found mine immediately. There was no hesitation in them. No confusion. Only certainty. Because being a good man does not automatically make someone the right man. The words landed softly, yet they carried enough weight to stop every thought in my mind. The wind shifted across the river. Cool, clean, fresh. I looked away first, unable to hold his gaze for too long. The truth between us had become impossible to ignore. For months I had tried to outrun it, rationalize it, bury it beneath obligations and expectations. Yet it had followed me all the way here, waiting patiently for me to stop pretending. Alexander stepped closer, not enough to crowd me, just enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence against the cool night air. "Do you remember the last conversation we had before you left?" he asked. I laughed softly. Unfortunately, yes. The memory returned instantly. A rooftop dinner, the city glowing beneath us, my heart already pulling in one direction while my fear dragged me in another. I remembered telling him I needed certainty, stability, logic. I remembered convincing myself that feelings were unreliable. Alexander looked toward the skyline. "You told me that choosing me felt dangerous." I smiled despite myself. It did. And now? His voice was calm, curious, not defensive. I thought carefully before answering. The city stretched endlessly around us. Lights, reflections, possibilities. The future no longer felt like a prison. It felt like an open road. Now I think choosing the wrong life is more dangerous. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. Not from relief, not from victory, more like someone hearing the truth finally spoken out loud. We stood there quietly afterward, the river moving steadily beside us, the skyline glowing ahead, the night unfolding around us with no concern for human plans. Then something unexpected happened. My phone rang again. This time it was my mother. I stared at the screen. Alexander glanced toward it. "You should answer." I nodded slowly and accepted the call. "Mom." My voice sounded smaller than I intended. There was a pause. Then her familiar voice filled my ear. Warm, calm, "Sweetheart." My throat tightened immediately. "I am sorry." Another pause. Then a soft laugh. "For what?" I blinked. "For disappointing everyone." The silence that followed lasted only a second. Yet it changed everything. "Isabella," my mother said gently, "the only thing that would disappoint me is watching you build a life that makes you unhappy." Tears blurred my vision instantly. I looked down at the river lights reflecting below. "You knew?" I whispered. "Mothers usually do." I laughed through the tears. Across from me, Alexander remained silent, giving me the space to have this moment. "Come home when you are ready," my mother continued. "Not because anyone expects anything from you, just because you are. Love." The call ended a minute later. I lowered the phone slowly. The city looked different now, brighter somehow, lighter, as though another weight had finally been lifted. Alexander studied me carefully. "You are smiling." I touched my cheek. He was right. For the first time all evening, I was. Not because the future was certain, not because every problem had disappeared, but because I finally understood something important. Freedom was not the absence of fear. It was choosing your truth despite it. And standing beneath the city lights beside the one man who had crossed Manhattan simply because I asked him to, I realized my story had never been about finding the perfect future. It had always been about finding the courage to choose it. The night had softened into a delicate quiet, the kind that made the city feel almost suspended, each light and shadow perfectly still beneath the moon's gentle glow. Alexander and I walked slowly along the river walk, our footsteps echoing softly against the damp concrete, mingling with the faint lapping of water against the piers. The air smelled faintly of rain and the river, a clean, crisp scent that made every breath feel restorative. I kept my hand lightly brushing against his as we moved, a silent acknowledgement of presence and reassurance. "Do you know what I love about this moment?" I asked quietly. Alexander turned his head toward me, curiosity flickering in his calm eyes. "What?" I paused, searching for the words that felt too heavy to speak yet too essential to hold inside. "That it is ours. Not dictated, not pressured. Just here, just now. Purely ours." He nodded, a slight smile touching his face, unspoken agreement passing between us like a delicate thread. "It is rare," he said softly, "to find a night untouched by expectation. A night where the only requirement is being present." I inhaled deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs, allowing the rhythm of the river and the gentle illumination of the city to sink into me. For months, years even, I had existed in a world dictated by what I should do, what others wanted, what comfort looked like. Tonight, every imposed rule and expectation seemed to dissolve, leaving me with a clarity I had never known before. Alexander stopped walking and turned fully toward me, his gaze steady and unwavering. "You are certain now, Isabella?" he asked, voice calm but carrying the weight of expectation, not imposed, but earned. I met his eyes, feeling the unspoken honesty in his question. "I am," I said softly, "certain of what I want, certain of what I will do, certain of who I will be." He reached out slowly, his hand brushing against mine with the gentlest pressure, neither demanding nor guiding, just present. The city stretched endlessly behind him, lights reflecting off the water in a cascade of gold and silver, each one a reminder that the world continued. Yet here we existed in a moment untouched by time. "Then there is no more hesitation," he said quietly. I nodded, understanding that the weight of decisions, the pull of expectation, had finally been replaced with the power of deliberate choice. The river shimmered beside us, the soft murmur of water and distant ferries a quiet accompaniment to our stillness. I let my gaze wander over the skyline, noticing details I had ignored before. The gentle glow of apartment windows, the flicker of neon signs along distant streets, the way the city's pulse seemed to slow when you paused long enough to notice it. Alexander's presence beside me made the unknown less frightening, the future less daunting. He was steady, certain, patient, and in that steadiness, I found the courage to accept my own truth. "No matter what happens now," I said softly, more to myself than to him, "I know this is right." He smiled, faint but genuine, a reflection of understanding that needed no words. "It always was," he said. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension leave my chest, the uncertainty melt away, replaced by a sense of agency and freedom I had never fully allowed myself to feel. Together we walked along the river's edge, hand in hand, listening to the quiet hum of the city, feeling the night wrap around us like a promise. The rest of the world, with its expectations, obligations, and plans, seemed distant now. All that mattered was this moment, our clarity, and the deliberate choice to step forward into a future defined not by others, but by the truth we had uncovered together. And as the river reflected the first hints of a rising moon, I realized that tonight was not an ending. It was a beginning, a night where courage, honesty, and the quiet power of choice converged, leaving me free to embrace exactly what I wanted, exactly who I was, and exactly where I belonged. The city had grown quiet now, the night stretching before us like a canvas painted with scattered lights and reflections on rain-slicked streets. Alexander and I continued along the river walk, our footsteps muted by the soft mist lingering in the air. Each step felt purposeful, deliberate, as though the entire night had been preparing me for this moment of clarity. I glanced at him, noticing the subtle tension in his shoulders that belied his calm expression. His eyes scanned the skyline as if he could read the city and its secrets, yet when they returned to me, they held a softness that was rare and grounding. "I cannot believe it ended up like this," I murmured, voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. Alexander tilted his head slightly, acknowledging my words without judgment. "It ended up the way it should," he said. I looked toward the river, water reflecting the gold and silver of distant windows, and realized that my life had been divided into what I thought I had to do and what I truly wanted. "I have spent so long listening to everyone else," I admitted, trying to meet expectations, following plans that were not mine. He stepped closer, but not too close, the space between us respectful, supportive, filled with quiet reassurance. "And now?" His question was soft, deliberate. "Now," I said slowly, letting the words find their way past hesitation. I listened to myself. The sound of water lapping against the piers filled the spaces between our words. The air smelled of wet stone and the faint trace of the river, clean and alive. I took a deep breath, letting it fill me entirely, grounding me in this rare feeling of ownership over my life. Alexander's hand brushed lightly against mine, a small, steadying contact that carried more meaning than words ever could. "Every choice you make from here," he said, "will be yours entirely. No compromise, no influence, just you." I nodded, feeling the weight of the statement and the freedom it represented. "It is terrifying," I whispered, almost to myself, and liberating all at once. He smiled faintly, acknowledging the honesty of my words without diminishing them. Courage is recognizing the fear and still taking the step, he said. I let his words settle inside me, feeling the tension in my chest ease just slightly, replaced by determination. We reached a point along the river where the water widened, calm and reflecting the moonlight like glass. I stopped, letting myself truly pause, Alexander beside me, his presence constant, not overwhelming, just steady. I do not know what the future holds, I admitted, voice soft, but I know I will face it on my own terms. He nodded. And you are not alone, he said simply, the reassurance in his voice more powerful than any promise could have been. I glanced up at the skyline, the city stretching endlessly in every direction, a million lives continuing without pause, each light a small story. I realized that my story had finally become mine to shape, guided by truth and choice. The moon reflected off the water, casting silver paths that led toward unknown possibilities. I felt a quiet joy, tentative but growing, as if the weight of obligation and expectation had been lifted from my shoulders entirely. Alexander's gaze held mine, steady, patient, offering a silent affirmation that I had arrived at the right conclusion for myself. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile, feeling a sense of peace that I had never known before. The river flowed beside us, the city whispered around us, and the night seemed to stretch infinitely, a canvas open to the choices I was now free to make. I let the tension release fully, exhaling slowly, knowing that whatever came next, I had the courage, clarity, and agency to face it. And as the wind moved gently across the water, lifting the edges of my hair, I felt the first true sense of belonging to my own life, unbound, deliberate, and entirely my own.